Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Down at the Dock Mod Edition. Today we're going to talk about power management with a battery monitor. It's tough to manage power when you can't really see what you're using or not using at the time. And a battery monitor gives you that visibility. So let's start. What is a battery monitor? Effectively, it's the gauge that tells you if your house battery bank full or empty or anywhere in between. Without the battery monitor, all you can really do is measure voltage. And the voltage basically goes from 12.8 to about 11.8 volts. So if you looked at the voltage of your bank and it was at 12.4 volts, is that enough to get you through morning? Right? That's funny. We're sitting here at anchor, but apparently there's some good rollers, some passing by boats. Alright, so what did we install? We installed a Victron bmv-712 smart battery monitor. So first off, why Victron? Well, Victron is a well-known brand in electrical gear for boats, and they have a very large product selection. You know, they do battery chargers, they do solar panel chargers, they do obviously battery monitors, they do battery or voltage and remote voltage sensors, and a lot of their stuff will integrate with each other. And I thought, well, if I'm going to upgrade other stuff on the boat, it'd be nice if it could all communicate to each other at some point. So I thought if I start with Victron, then if I add extra stuff to the boat, it would be easy to integrate. In addition to the state of charge, a battery monitor also measures real-time performance, real-time usage, and it calculates your time to go remaining. So, you know, obviously it'll tell you what your voltage is, so say 12.4 volts, whatnot, but then it'll say your batteries are at 68% state of charge, and it'll say you've got, you know, 18 hours and 42 minutes till empty. Right. So before I go to bed, I want to see at least 8 to 10 hours available on the battery monitor. So understanding your power needs. Not knowing how much power everything on the boat consumes makes it difficult to plan for extensive trips. At home, we get spoiled because electric is so cheap and readily available. On the boat, not so much. So you kind of have to know what your requirements are. And without knowing what your requirements are, then you find out that you don't have enough. What do? Right? Do you spend the money and upgrade to lithium? And then if so, how big do you have to go? Right? Or what if you just go buy that portable generator? All right, how big of a portable generator do you need, and how long are you going to have to run it? And maybe you upgrade solar, but then how big of a panel do you have to go, and how effective is solar anyway? Right? You just leave all these extra questions, right? So you really got to start with knowing what your power needs are. Everybody's boat usage is different, and your usage will most likely vary greatly from ours. We are very heavy power users, and I don't want to run less when I'm on the boat. So we chose the opposite, which was to once we understood the power requirements, then we upgraded our battery bank, we upgraded our solar, which we'll get into in future videos. All right, so how do you identify your requirements using the battery monitor? Well, first thing, do a quick explanation of AC versus DC power. The Ranger Tug R27 outboard has both on board. So at high level, AC is alternating current. It's 120 volts. Think of it like the tides. The tide comes in, the tide comes back out. Where DC is at 12 volts and it's direct current. It's more like a river, always going the same direction, and I'm always about the same speed. So on our boat, we have both types of power. The easiest way to look at this is if you go down and look at your AC power panel, there's a breaker there. Anything there's a breaker for, that's your AC loads. So for example, your port and starboard outlets, your coffee maker, actually not coffee maker, that comes off the port outlet, but there'll be a breaker for the hot water tank, there's a breaker for the electric grill, there's a breaker for the battery charger. Those are all AC loads. What you'll notice is the refrigerators don't have a breaker on the AC panel. They do make refrigerators for boats that are AC and DC powered, but that's not what was installed on our boat. Our boat came with 2 refrigerators, the cabin and the cockpit refrigerator. The refrigerators are powered by 12 volt DC. So when I plug into shore power, that's AC power the boat plugs into, then the refrigerators continue to run off of the house battery bank. So as the house battery bank goes down, the battery charger fills it back up again. So using the battery monitor, I was able to go around the boat and turn on and off all the switches, every appliance. I would then look at the battery monitor and see the change. And if I saw the current wattage change by 17 watts, then I knew that that light cost me 17 watts whenever it's on. This is how the power management spreadsheet came to be. I was able to measure most of the loads on the boat this way, which made it real easy. Then I could take the spreadsheet, I could sit at home in the evening, I could just plug the numbers in and say, if I was at anchor, I'd probably run the lights for 2 hours. We'd probably watch a movie on the DVD player for another 2 hours. And then it just does the math and would tell me how many watts I would need per day. And it would show me how far down the battery bank would go. It's really easy to find out that, what we want to use is a lot more than what the boat was able to provide, which here and again led to our battery upgrade. So in the version 2.0 of my Excel spreadsheet, I've included the Ranger Tug 27 Outboard Northwest Edition, the Luxury Edition, and the Channel Surfing Edition, just so you guys can see the compare and contrast. If you're interested in the spreadsheet, just send us an email and we'll send it to you. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's easily modifiable for other Ranger tugs, and it actually, the way I redid it, it would work for any other boat. You would just have to go through your boat after you put a battery monitor in, turn things on or off, and add and remove appliances that your boat has. So installation of the battery monitor. So there's two parts to it. There's the shunt and the gauge. We put the gauge in the galley, and the way to install it in the galley was right next to it is the water pump. There's 4 screws that hold the panel in for the water pump. Pull those 4 screws out, get the water pump out of the water pump instrumentation out of the way, and you can reach your hand back there and get behind where the Victron gauge goes. Then you'll need a fish tape to fish the wire that the battery gauge connects to the shunt. The shunt we installed in the Port Lazarette next to the batteries to be a short run. Now that shunt has 2 sides to it, load and battery, and it's only installed on the negative side of this. You want to make sure that the battery side of the shunt goes to the battery and the load side goes to the loads, and you have to move every connection that's on the battery to the load side, and I mean every connection, right? So the simplest way to do this is to put in a negative bus bar, and then take all the negatives, and when I mean negatives, it'll be like the battery charger negative, the solar charger negative, the auxiliary kicker negative, the ACR, automatic charge relay negative, the house loads negative. All of those negative cables get moved to the bus bar, and then you run a negative cable from the bus bar to the load side of the shunt, and then you run a negative cable from the battery side of the shunt to the battery. Right. I like to say is trace the cables starting with your house batteries. Just trace the negative cables, and everything you run into should be another battery, or it should be the shunt. If you have the inverter, the negative to the inverter, if you have that plugged right into the battery, it will bypass the shunt, and therefore you won't get accurate readings from it. So it's really important that you move all your loads, both charging sources and things that consume, to the load side of that shunt. Alright, so configuration of the battery monitor. So let's configure the bmv-712 smart battery monitor, right? So for battery capacity, first off, everything I leave is defaults, and the only things you have to change is the battery capacity. For channel surfing, I set that to 348 amp hours because we have 3 116 amp hour Firefly Oasis G31 batteries. Charge voltage is left at 13.2, that was the default. The discharge floor I set to 20% state of charge, which is 80% depth of discharge, and that's specific to what the Firefly AGM batteries can do. Time to go averaging period I set to 0 minutes, and then battery start synchronized. Battery state of charge is reset after 100% should be enabled on the bottom, which is the default. If you've got the Northwest edition with the AGM batteries, you would set this to 100. You'd set it to 220 amp hours for capacity, and you would use 40% for your discharge floor, which is 60% depth of discharge. If you've got the Luxury edition with lithium-ion batteries, or actually the lithium phosphate batteries, I should say, you'll want 600 amp hours for your capacity, with a discharge floor of 10% state of charge, which is 90% depth of discharge. For configuration of the gauge, I enabled the following 5 fields: main voltage display, current display, power display, consumed amp hours display, and state of charge display. And that's what's actually shown on the gauge as you cycle through the readings on it. So time to go averaging is something I played with on the Victron. This is a pretty important setting. It can be set anywhere from 0 to 12 minutes. I've played with it at 12 minutes. I've played with it at 5 and 6 minutes, and what I've actually found is 0 minutes works best. What that setting does is it tells the battery monitor, look at, let's say we had it set to 12 minutes. It's going to look at the average of what the past 12 minutes of electrical consumption was, and use that to figure out its math. What I've found out is that there's not enough switches on the boat for that really to matter, and it would end up skewing the readings, especially because the refrigerators turn themselves on and off at will, and it's hard to know what their cycle is. So I just set it to 0, which is an instantaneous reading. So I look at the battery monitor, and the time to go averaging is based on what's running at the time. If it's too high, I can go around and turn off switches until I get in, and the wattage consumption will go down, and the time to go counter will increase. So as an illustration of how this works, at 58% state of charge, how does the battery monitor know that I have 22 hours remaining? It knows I can't go lower than 20% state of charge, because that's what I've configured my discharge floor to be. If I continue to pull 7.3 amps for 22 hours, an additional 164 amps will be consumed. I've already consumed 103 amps. Another 164 amps consumed would put me at a negative 267 amp hours total, which is about 20% state of charge for our house bank. Alright, so now let's apply everything we've discussed and see to show how powerful of a tool a battery monitor is. But unfortunately, to do this, we also have to understand some basics about how batteries work, right, and how we charge them. So AGM and lead-acid batteries have 3 phases of charging: bulk, absorption, and float. Bulk charging occurs between 0% and about 85% state of charge. Typically, it's during this phase that the battery monitor, or the battery, will consume the most amount of charge. The absorption phase is usually the top 15%. Call it 85 to 100% state of charge for the battery. During that absorption phase, the batteries must slow down their rate of charging by a lot. It's just chemistry. If I can send 30 amps into that battery during the bulk phase, that absorption phase is going to slow down and take 10 amps, then 9 amps, then 8, then 7. This is going to go on for hours, right? Right, and then the final phase is the float phase. This just maintains the batteries topped off, right? So so deep cycle batteries have an amp hour rating. This is the amount of charge that they have based over a 20-hour period. So a 110 amp hour battery, for example, can output 5.5 amps for 20 hours, but that's from 100% to 0. We don't take batteries to 0, else we risk damaging them. Right, so typically for AGM batteries, we don't take them below 60% depth of discharge, also referred to as 40% state of charge. So this is what I mean when you hear me talk about usable capacity, right? When we're at anchor on the boat, we don't want to use the bottom 40% of the battery, because that will damage the batteries potentially. And the top 15% of the battery, we'll get to use that the first night that we're out. But after that, we just don't have enough time to economically recharge the batteries from 85% back to 100%, because the batteries just don't consume the charge fast enough to make it worthwhile running that generator or idling the engine. Solar might actually get you into the absorption phase. But here and again, it depends on the sun and what time of day and what your usage and stuff is. So if we can't use the bottom 40% and we can't really recharge the top 15%, that leaves us the middle. That's the 45% usable capacity here we talk about. All right, so for that 110 amp hour battery, it's really only a 50 amp hours usable capacity, right? And so if you have two 110 amp hour batteries, then you're going to get 100 amp hours total usable out of them. When the house battery bank hits 85% of charge, it should be about a negative 33 amp hours consumed. When it gets to 40% state of charge, it should read about a negative 132 amp hours consumed. This is assuming you've got a pair of 110 amp hour batteries, right? So that's your 100 amp hours usable in that range. When you plug in that portable 2,000 watt generator, it provides AC power at 120 volts. So that would let you run the microwave, let you run the coffee maker, because those are all AC powered loads. You could run the hot water heater with that portable generator, and then you're also going to turn the battery charger on to charge the battery. Now, if all you're interested in is charging the batteries, because that's what the refrigerators and most everything else in the boat runs, just be advised that on the Northwest Edition, it's a 20 amp battery charger that's installed. So that's about 240 watts. So if you've got a 2,000 watt portable generator idling on the transom, just know you're using 240 watts out of the 2,000 available to charge those battery banks. You know, some tips on running that generator is when you watch the battery monitor, right, once you get back up to around 85% state of charge, that's the time to turn the generator off. Ideally, you can also idle the Yamaha F300 and use it as a generator. It'll actually put between 20 and 30 amps in at idle, which is just as effective as the battery charger running off of a portable generator would do. But here's a tip: if you're running that generator, you can also idle the Yamaha F300 for an additional, call it 20 amps. And if it's sunny out, you've got solar up there, solar is going to help out well. So you can stack multiple charging sources, right? Get 20 amps from your portable generator going through your battery charger, get another 20 amps idling from the Yamaha engine, call it maybe another 8 amps coming from solar. You can end up with, let's say, 48 amps total going into the battery bank. And that'll cut your charge time down quite a bit, and then you can turn that generator off quicker. We'll talk a lot more about the Firefly battery upgrades that I did on channel surfing in the next episode, but I'm going to give you some of the numbers now just so you can see the difference to compare it against the Northwest Edition, which is that's the edition from Ranger Tug that we purchased. So with the three Firefly Oasis G31 batteries, each being 116 amp hours apiece, Firefly batteries can safely go down to 80% depth of discharge. That's why I set my discharge floor to 20% state of charge. This provides for 65% usable capacity. So altogether, see, our total capacity is 348 amp hours. 85% state of charge is a negative 52 amp hours. 20% state of charge is a negative 278 amp hours. That gives us 226 amp hours usable capacity. To say that differently, three Firefly G31 batteries are the equivalent of 4.5 of the 110 amp hour AGM factory batteries. Power is obviously not unlimited on board, so we also must conserve electrical. A couple of easy ways to do that. First one is, like, if you're anchoring, change your anchor light out. It comes with a 10 watt bulb. Change it out to an LED anchor light. That'll drop it to just under 2 watts. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you run that anchor light for 10-12 hours, that's about 8 amps a night that you'll save. And if that's 8 amps out of 100 usable, that's significant, right? An anchor drag alarm, use your phone. Do not use the Garmin chart plotter for an anchor drag alarm. That chart plotter, even if it's in standby, it consumes an enormous amount of watts. I want to say it's like 25 watts-ish. I'd have to look at my spreadsheet, but overall it'll be about 25 amps a night is what you would go through to leave that chart plotter running all night. So I shut the chart plotter off. There's tons of anchor drag apps out there for your phones. I use Anchor Pro on my iPhone. And then also be sure to turn things off when you're not using them. That's the simplest way to conserve. It's important to understand your boat's electrical needs. At home, you know, we do take electrical for granted because it's so plentiful and inexpensive. On a boat, electrical often comes at a premium and is oftentimes in short supply. Once you get your battery monitor installed, I encourage you to do this experiment. Fully charge your batteries on shore power, put a blanket over the solar panel if you've got one, and then disconnect from shore power. And then walk away from the boat, come back in 12 hours, right? On channel surfing, we noted that it used 23 amp hours in 12 hours, so I can safely say that without us on the boat, just the refrigerators running and the basic loads of the boat that run 24/7 mostly, the boat's going to go through 50 amps a day, right? And then add us to the boat, we're going to go above and beyond that. You can also find out what everything consumes just by with that battery monitor by going around pulling fuses and watching the change on the battery monitor to see, you know, wattage go up or down based on what you turn on or turn off. And finally, let's talk about time and money, right? So what did it take to actually do the install? What did I spend for it, right? So tools needed for the installation. You need a fish tape to route the cable from the gauge to the shunt. It's like a almost like a network cable, RJ45 jack, goes in the back of the gauge that sits in the galley to the shunt. I make my own battery cables, so I bought a hydraulic crimp tool for battery lugs up to 4/0 in size. A battery voltage meter is also required and should really be something that you should have on the boat. Time-wise, it's about a 3 to 4 hour job on an RT27 outboard. I bought the Victron bmv-712 smart battery monitor, gray gauge, 500 amps off Amazon. Lizina will put the link in the description. It was 210 bucks. I needed a battery jumper to go from the battery to the shunt. This is a 2-foot yellow 2/0 battery cable with lugs that have 3/8 inch openings. The cable needs to be marine grade tin copper cable. Whether you buy or make this cable, it should be under 40 bucks. I know it's a lot of information. I hope you find this useful and it helps you better understand electrical and how a battery monitor can help manage power on your boat. Thanks again for watching and stay tuned for more channel surfing.